Hi, today we're going to talk about a particular piece of traditional Chinese metaphysics, sometimes called traditional Chinese cosmology. We're going to talk about what's called the five element theory or the five phases theory. In Chinese, it's called the Wǔxíng. It's a particular worldview that informs lots of traditional philosophy in China. It informs much of what's called traditional Chinese medicine and various kinds of health practices, Qigong practices. It informs Chinese sexual yoga traditions. It informs lots of things. To be clear, it's not the only worldview in traditional China. Not every thinker or writer or practitioner endorsed the five phases or five element theory. Certainly, it's not the case that everyone in China endorses it today, but it is one influential, very, very widespread theory or worldview that you find in traditional Chinese philosophy, religion, spirituality, health practices, etc. So it's called the five element theory or the five phases. So you'll see it said both ways. The current academic way of talking about it in English is typically to call it the five phases, right? The five phases. That says the five phases, PHASES, or sometimes it's called the five element theory or the five elements. And we'll explain why in a little bit. In Chinese, the pinyin transliteration of it is Wǔxíng, W-U, and typically new word, although not always. Sometimes there's no space in there, X-I-N-G. And the Wu, W-U, means five, and Xing in this case can be translated as phases or elements. And you'll see it in the older Wade-Giles transliteration sometimes as W-U, the new word, H-S-I-N-G. Just a different way of spelling the same thing. It's still pronounced Wǔxíng, means the same thing. So what is this theory? And I'm going to talk you through it. And there's a lot of places. You could start any number of places. But I'm going to start with metal. So in this theory, it says reality has five basic elements or forces or manifestations of energy or qi, and one of them is metal. And so you just have to go with that for the moment. And on the theory, metal at some level of description gives rise to water. So water is, these are in a particular order, but there's no particular place to start. But in our system, or on the way we're introducing it, metal is one of the elements or one of the phases. The second is water. Water at some level or in some way gives rise to wood, W-O-O-D. It says wood. So wood in this traditional Chinese five element or five phase system is the third of the phases we're going to deal with. Wood gives rise to fire. Fire gives rise to earth. And then earth in turn gives rise to metal. So you'll see there's a cycle here. And as I said, right, it doesn't matter where you start, but we just happen to decide we're going to start with metal over here. So the idea is that each of these five basic features of reality gives rise to another one in this cycle. And we'll talk about what gives rise to means in a little bit. Now, so wait, there's five elements or five phases: metal, water, wood, fire, and earth. And you could imagine, I don't know, try to put yourself in a position where you have not been indoctrinated by what my colleagues in the physics and chemistry department tell you, or what your teachers perhaps told you growing up, right? A world that is described at some level as being composed of basic elements of the sort that you find on a periodic table of elements. And instead, imagine you're looking around a world. What are the different things that one sees? Well, all kinds of things, right? There's like rabbits, and there's like I guess there's more things than rabbits. There's people, and there's chunks of wood, and there's clay pots, and there's alcohol, and there's lightning bolts, and there's all kinds of things, right? All the things in the world. But if you try to say, well, what are the things that are in common to them? Well, you look around, there's water, okay, there's liquid stuff. And for the moment, let's think of that as just water. There's vegetation and growing things. So like this is wood, it doesn't mean just like hardwood or like the wood of a tree trunk, but it includes like all kind of growing vegetation we might think of under the heading of wood, right? So plant like organic material. There's bits of fire, that's cool, fire, right? You get fire. There's like earth, and earth here, don't think of earth primarily as like a globe, right? That's not the picture we're talking about here. We're talking about like soil and clay and stone and rock and things like that, right? That kind of stuff. And then there's shiny stuff like metal. And metal is like obviously things like gold and silver, but any kind of metallic material like iron, bronze, that would fall under this too. And there's an idea that they are in this cycle. And the idea at some level of description is metal transforms into water and gives rise to water. And at some level, water transforms into wood or vegetation and growth. And wood somehow transforms into fire, that makes sense, and fire transforms into earth. And the earth element or feature reality can give rise to metal, like in this ongoing infinite cycle. So like this will often, especially if you read books that are a little bit older or non-academic books, the Chinese expression Wǔxíng will often be translated as the 5 elements. And this is similar to like an ancient Greek or an ancient Indian traditional element system, right? The ancient Greeks often talked about 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. One of the traditional Indian systems talked about earth, water, fire, air, and space as 5 elements. And this sort of seems like the Chinese equivalent of it, right? Although there's no air in the system, right? And there's no space in the system as in the Indian system. And instead we've got metal and wood in it. But if you think of elements like we often think of like elements that you're taught in chemistry, like the periodic table, like the elements of the basic building blocks that don't transition into anything else, it's not like that in the Chinese system, this traditional Chinese system. Water gives rise to or somehow becomes wood. Wood transforms into fire, fire into earth, or the metal. So that's why a lot of times the standard academic translation of Wǔxíng these days is the 5 phases. And I'll go back and forth to call it both ways. Now, one thing to kind of like, how do you remember this, right? And you're going to be asked to remember this. Well, there's little like a kind of heuristic or other kinds of memory techniques we might just have for this. And so let's just start with water for the moment. Water gives rise to wood. That kind of is intuitive sense, right? You water a plant, the plant grows. Or in springtime in northern temperate climates, right? The rain will fall and then the tulips will pop up or something, right? Like tulips are vegetation growth, it's wood. Water creates wood. Okay, that makes sense. And wood creates fire. That makes total sense, right? You burn fire, you burn wood, you get fire. Fire, when it burns out like a wood fire, creates ash, and ash is a kind of earth or soil. So fire creates ash of earth. Earth gives rise to metal. That makes sense, right? Like you mine metals out of the earth, right? The earth, the soil is giving somehow give rise to metal. And then metal gives rise to water. That might seem kind of funny, but you might think of like a beer can on a hot summer day, a cold beer can or a cold, I don't know, Jolt can or whatever you drink, having condensation on the outside of it, right? We have a story we tell now in terms of chemistry and the temperature affecting how much water can be held in the air, and it changes into water condenses. But if you just kind of look at it intuitively, it's like, oh yeah, that metal somehow gives rise to the water on it. Or metal, if you fire it up and heat it a lot, it melts and becomes liquid. Just think of these as memory techniques. These are 5 basic elements or phases. Now, what's important about this is that we're not going to like argue at the moment, try to make sense of like why this should be taken seriously not yet, right? Like we got to learn the system, right? But like this is clearly a different system than you would get if you go into most contemporary physics or chemistry classes, where they say, what's the world made of? It's made of molecules and atoms and subatomic particles and whatever else there is. Just go with it for now. Now, the idea is that these different phases are correlated with lots of things. And so one thing they're each correlated with is a color. On this system, metal is correlated with the color white. And then you think of like the shininess of metal, like silver, gold is kind of like a shininess that's sort of the color white. Water on this system is correlated with the color blue, which can make sense. It's either blue or sometimes it's like a dark blue or a black sometimes. Sometimes it's black, but blue or black, we'll just call it blue for now. Wood, you might think is brown, but it's not, it's green, but my green marker's not working, but this one might. Wood is correlated with the color green. That's a green. And the leaves and the growth of vegetation. Fire, you might guess orange, but you'd be wrong. Fire in this system is red. And earth is yellow. And you might think of, like in China, the Yellow River is so called because it gets lots of silt in it. And the soil in that region of China has a kind of yellowish kind of or tannish tone to it. But presumably that's at some level where it comes from. Yellow is the color of earth. And then these are correlated with seasons of the year. So metal is correlated with autumn. And autumn gives rise to winter. Water is correlated with the season winter. Winter gives rise to spring. And that makes sort of sense if you think about like, at least in northern, like deciduous temperate climates, a little bit different in Florida, right? But like the leaves come out on deciduous trees and the grass begins to grow again and flowers come up and blossom in the springtime, right? So spring is the time of wood. Fire is summer. And then, right, if you think of 4 seasons, we got this 5th one we got in, but earth is correlated with late summer. So like that time period, like in the very late part of summer, maybe like August into September would be sort of like the earth time of the system. They give it 5. Now, there's more layers to this, and part of it, you kind of need to see the layers in order to begin to see the rest of it working. So metal is correlated with the color white and the season autumn. It's also correlated with directions in space. So metal is correlated with the direction west. If you think about from where I am in this house right now, west is that way. If I turn to the right, I'm facing the north. Water is correlated with the direction north. From the north, I turn 1 unit to the right, I'm facing the east. So wood is correlated with east. From the east, I turn 1 unit to the right, I'm facing the south. And then for earth, it's the kind of funky one. Earth is correlated with the center. And I'm running out of room over there, but that says center, really. So there's 5 directions on this system. It all comes in 5s. And right, this sort of makes sense, right? If you're where China was, right, in the northern hemisphere, the south is where things are going to be hotter, fire in summertime. Winter going to be cold. It's in the north, right? You can kind of see like things that make intuitive sense here, but this is the system. Now, one of the things about the Chinese 5-phase metaphysics is that it sees connections. You can already begin to see it. There's connections. Metal is connected to white, is connected to autumn, is connected to the west. Water is connected to north and blue and winter. But it's connections between these basic elements or these basic phases and like directions and seasons and big picture stuff. But it's also connected, it's thought, to our bodies. The phrase that's often used is the macrocosm, the big world is connected resonates with the microcosm on the inside of the individual. So they're connected with organs. These are the key organs of traditional Chinese medicine. Metal is connected with the lungs, which kind of makes sense, I guess, if you think of metal and whiteness and like tissues of the body, right? The lungs are, I guess, kind of whitish or grayish, but metal's connected with the lungs. Water is connected with the kidneys, kind of makes sense. Wood in green and spring and east is connected to the liver, one of the key organs of Chinese medicine. Fire, red, summer, south is connected to the heart in the Chinese, this particular Chinese system. And earth, yellow, late summer, center, I'm running out of room, I'm gonna write up here, is connected with the spleen. And so the spleen is one of the key organs in Chinese medicine. So earth, spleen, metal, lungs, water, kidneys, wood, liver, fire, heart. And that's your system. Now there's lots of other things connected with this stuff. There's flavors in Chinese traditional cuisine. They talk about the 5 flavors. There are musical tones. There are there are other organs that are connected. But the last one for right now that I want to give you that will be helpful, these are each connected to emotions. And there's also virtues and strengths, but in particular, I want to talk about kind of challenging, or what I think of as negative emotions. And to be clear, like some of what I'm describing here, there's different ways of translating it, and it's not always fully systematic. Different, even in Chinese, different texts might emphasize different things. But here's sort of one way of framing it. It's a pretty standard way, but it's one way. So metal and the lungs. It's thought that when the metal element in the body gets out of balance in a certain kind of way, it can lead to sadness. So sadness, or the energy of grief, that's thought to be connected to the metal element, or the metal energy in the body and to the lungs. The kidneys and the water element, that's connected to the emotion fear. So water, blue, winter, kidneys, the north, it's connected to fear. And like at a practical level, the idea in the theory is that if something's out of balance with the kidneys, or the water element of the kidneys, it can manifest as fear. Or if one is frightened in a certain kind of way by things in their environment, that this can impact the kidneys in particular, right? The connections go both ways. Wood and the liver is connected to anger. So anger is the challenging or negative emotion that's often said to arise when the wood element in the body gets out of balance. Fire in the heart, one way to describe the negative emotion here is impatience, kind of agitated energy of impatience if the heart is got too much fire energy in it. And again, for these, I'm bracketing questions about whether this story is literally true. And I'm bracketing questions about how this does or does not compare to contemporary psychology or neuroscience or contemporary physics and chemistry or biology, but just the story that's told here. The fire element, where the fire phase in the heart is connected to impatience. And over here, I'm running out of room, but like this earth element I'll draw right here is connected to worry or anxiety. And to be clear, sometimes the translations of how you translate fear and anxiety, the English words don't always neatly match up. But for our purposes, let's say that earth, right, the terms we'll use are worry or anxiety. So what do we got? We have this worldview that says, right, just take it back to its very most basics again. Reality, or the world we live in, has 5 kinds of thing or energy in it. And this might be poetic, it might be literal, it might be both. Reality is divided into metal, water, wood, fire, and earth. Okay. And they're arranged in a certain kind of way. That metal gives rise to water, right? The beer can with condensation on the outside in a hot summer day. Water transitions into or gives rise to wood, right? Water gives rise to plant growth. Wood creates fire. Fire creates the ash of earth, and earth gives rise to metal you mine out of the ground. And beyond that, right, metal is connected to white, water to a deep blue or black color, wood energy to green of leaves and growth, chlorophyll-filled plant matter, right? Fire to red, earth to yellow. Now, for this, some of this is just code, right? Like, I mean, at some level, the idea is that the energy of fire is connected to redness, but it's also like this is a code that you can begin to read certain kinds of art, right? Like red symbolizes fire energy, right? And yellow symbolizes earth, things like that. But the thought is there's this correlation between the element and the color, earth, yellow. And then the seasons, right? The cycle of the seasons is mapped out here. It could start anywhere, but we'll start from autumn with metal, gives rise to winter, water. Winter gives rise to spring of wood. Spring gives rise to summer, fire. And we need to add a fifth season in just because we got to make it 5. The summer gives rise to late summer, right? The earth element. And then late summer gives rise again to fall or autumn. The directions are mapped out on this, right? So space and time, right? The time of the seasons and then the space of being located in space. So like I point to the west, that's metal. I turn, metal gives rise to the north, the kidneys. North gives rise from where I'm sitting to the east, to the wood element. East gives rise to the south behind me, right? That's the fire element. And then we come to the center, right? Wherever the center is, that's the earth. Then it maps into the body, right? And in traditional Chinese medicine, these are technically called the 5 main yin organs of yin and yang. But the most important organs for Chinese medicine are going to be the lungs, the kidneys, the liver. The kidneys count as 1, the 2 lungs count as 1, the liver, the heart, and the spleen, right? The spleen is kind of funky looking organ behind your stomach on your left side. I'm pointing to my left, but on your left. Behind the stomach is the spleen. In what Western or what just contemporary physicians tell us is its spleen is connected at some level to things like immune reactions of some sort or whatever it does. But in Chinese medicine, it has a really, really prominent function. And so, right, the metal of the lungs, water of the kidneys, wood of the liver, fire of the heart, and the earth of the spleen. And then the last piece that I'm giving you right now is the emotions, right? These are emotions that you might think of as arising when things get out of balance with that element or that phase. Or that if that emotion comes at somebody, it can throw things off of that element. It can go both ways, right? So sadness with the lungs. And you might imagine, right, when someone's really sad, they might spontaneously cry out from the lungs. I mean, that might be part of the logic of it, but it might also just help you remember, right? The crying out of the lungs, sadness. The kidneys is fear. And I've heard people say that sometimes when you feel fear, you might feel coldness in your lower back. I'm not sure if that's my experience that I can ever recall, but I've heard people say, at least when trying to explain this, right, that there can be kind of a coldness in your lower back, chills there, right? And that might be part of the logic for why the kidneys are thought to connect to fear. The liver connected to anger. And so just as an aside, the liver and the gallbladder are close in the body organs. And in Chinese medicine, the liver is connected very closely to the gallbladder. The gallbladder is the yang organ corresponding to the yin of the liver. But like in English, I don't know where this comes from, but there's like an old saying like, that really takes a lot of gall, right? Or I don't know if you say like gets my gall, but like in English, some traditional sayings will indicate like gall is connected to anger, and gall and the liver, maybe there's a story to be told there, but the idea is that the liver, when it gets out of balance, that can give rise to anger. Impatience at the heart, And the spleen is connected to worry or anxiety. And you might think of, like, if, speaking really loosely here, if you're ungrounded or out of touch with the earth, right, it might lead to feeling anxious, right? Or things are out of whack, out of sync. You're not connected to the stability of the earth. Maybe that's the story to tell, but worry, anxiety is the negative emotion that's said to come out of the earth, or the earth element when it's out of balance. So here's the story. Now, one more big piece you need in order to be able to do some interesting stuff with us. So this is the 5 phases, the 5 elements, the Wǔxíng, literally the 5 phases or 5 elements Wǔxíng. Now, what I've described here, just I'm going to draw the arrows in red right now, not to indicate fire, but just to help you keep track of it. These arrows, right, of one thing creating the other. That's one cycle here that's really important. It's the creation cycle of the 5 phases. Metal creates water, water creates wood, wood creates fire, fire creates earth. Now, I'm going to need to erase some stuff because my board here is pretty small, but you've got it in your notes, hopefully, or you can go back and rewatch this, okay? So that's part of the system. But in the Chinese 5-phase system, there's other system that's mapped onto it. Metal creates water. Let me just say, like, if everything creates, you might say, well, how does the system not get out of control, right? I mean, forget about like perpetual motion or conservation of energy theories you might bring to it. You may just say, look, if the story is metal creates water, water creates wood, wood creates fire, fire creates earth, earth creates metal. Well, wait a minute, then metal's going to create this, and it's just going to keep spiraling, getting more and more intense. That might seem like it goes out of balance. But the full system has a separate cycle that also maps onto this. Metal creates water, but at the same time, metal controls wood. So the red arrows on this, or the red and black arrows, indicate creation or makes it more. But metal at the same time tamps down or minimizes or controls wood. Water creates wood, but at the same time it controls or tamps down fire. So you can get the pattern already, right? Each one in the system, it creates the next one and it skips one to control it. So metal skips water to control wood. Water skips wood to control fire. Wood skips fire to control earth. Fire skips earth to control metal. Earth skips metal to control water. If I had drawn this more neatly, you would look like a 5-pointed star in there. It's kind of a sloppy 5-pointed star, but you get the picture. So what we have here, right? Metal creates water, water creates wood, but metal is at the same time balancing that by tamping down or controlling the wood. Go to the next one. Water creates wood and wood creates fire, but water puts out the fire, controls fire. So it keeps it in balance if everything's going right. Wood creates fire, fire creates the ash of earth, but wood controls earth. And the idea is that the system keeps itself in balance. Each element or phase creates the next one, but then tamps down or controls the 1, 2 after that, going all the way around. Now, there's memory techniques for this, right? And so you can look it up, but like it helps if you can begin to see the world through this. Even if you reject the system, right? You see how it functions. But one way to just help remember it. Metal controls wood. That's like metal of an axe chops wood, right? So it chops the wood, it breaks it apart. Water controls fire. That's easy. Water puts out fire, right? That's easy to remember. Wood controls earth. Sometimes the way this is described is like wood digs the earth, right? Like you have an old like oak tree, seen around Tampa a lot, and the roots sort of work their way through over time the earth and push the earth up, like old sidewalks pushed up. The wood controls the earth by working its way through it, right? It controls the earth. Or you might imagine like farmers like before you could go to Home Depot or to the farm supply store to get like metal tools, or I guess the farm supply store to get a combine or whatever. You have like a stick that you kind of use as like to dig the earth, right? You dig a hole with a stick, right? And so the wood digs the earth. Fire controls metal. That's easy, right? You fire up metal and it melts, right? And you shape it how you want to shape it. And earth controls water. That is, earth muddies water. You put a bunch of earth in a puddle, it muddies it up, it controls it. Or in a grand scale, you can have a dam made of earth and it stops the water. So earth controls water. So this is the 5-phase system. And it's a 5-phase or 5-element system, right? The 5 elements are metal, water, wood, fire, earth. There's one cycle where each one gives rise to that, because that's the creation cycle. That's in red. Then there's a counterbalancing control cycle. That's in blue. And then you need to remember, within each element, there are all these correlations. Now, for the moment, let's just keep that as correlations and not worry about what's causing it here. That's a question about the nature of the system and how it differs, say, from what a lot of people think of as scientific thinking coming out of, say, the scientific revolution and contemporary scientific worldviews about looking for causal connections between things. For now, just bracket that. We'll come to that eventually. Within each of these, there's these correlations, right? Just starting with fire. Fire, I've erased it, but it correlates with redness, with the heart, with south, with summertime, with impatience. Earth correlates with yellow, with spleen, with late summertime, with the direction center, with worry and anxiety. Metal correlates with white, with autumn, west, the lungs, and sadness. Water correlates with deep blue or black color, with the north, with fear, with winter, with the kidneys. And wood correlates with anger, with the liver, springtime green, the east. So that's the system. Now, right, if this wasn't a video, we'd have conversation about this and we'd all feel like fascinated and enlightened. But just imagine we've had that. We got to move on. We're in a video here. This we can begin to see, at least at a rudimentary level, how traditional Chinese health and medical practices might see a person, and people say holistically. There's lots of interesting academic debates about exactly how we frame this and what words and concepts we use to describe it. But what you'll often hear is people will make claims that, say, traditional Chinese medicine treats the whole person and it doesn't separate body from mind. Again, right, there's really important, interesting academic debates about whether that's actually true or to what degree. But, right, it's something that's often said, right, that TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, or just like traditional Chinese health practices in general, often see connections in places where at least a certain caricature of Western medicine sort of sees parts that one can treat individually. And whether that's an accurate description of most practicing physicians, let that be for now. But so in the using the 5-phase system, there's different ways that things might function here. And to be clear, I'm not a trained Chinese medical health professional, right? So I'm sort of just beginning to like give you like the surface level kinds of principles that might be here. But so, for example, suppose somebody were to go to a Chinese medical practitioner, right, an acupuncturist or an herbalist, and suppose they were like finding themselves just consumed with anger, right? They're like, oh, just angry all the time. It might be that you might say, oh, there's an imbalance of the wood energy in their liver. But this is a sign something's out of whack with the liver. And then to treat that, right, suppose the person with lots of experience and much more theory than we've talked about here. Says, oh, there's an imbalance of the wood element at the liver, and it's manifesting on other things as anger. You might give some kind of herbs or acupuncture or some kind of like exercise prescription to treat and balance the wood element at the liver. But so you might also look back at the kidneys and say, since kidneys and the water element creates wood, maybe the problem is really something's out of balance with the kidneys, which is causing the wood element and the liver to be out of balance. So you might instead, or in addition, treat the kidneys. Give some herb that's supposed to help the kidneys, or acupuncture, something like give a needle that's connected to the kidneys or the water element. But it also could be the metal, right? The metal controls the wood. If the metal is too strong, it might tamp down the wood, right? Or if the metal is too weak, it might let the wood get out of balance. So you might go back to the metal and also treat something in the lungs, or with the metal element in general, right? You might strengthen or control the metal element. Likewise, right? Suppose somebody is, let's say, having lung problems, right? So I don't know, whatever it's manifesting as. They have a sickness that's connected to the lungs. Well, you say, okay, that the metal is out of balance. Maybe it's the earth, right? Maybe the person is somehow their earth element or their spleen has a trouble with it. Or maybe, right, remember the negative emotion for the earth is anxiety. You might say, well, maybe this person is dealing with lots of worry and anxiety, and it's throwing the spleen and the earth element off balance, and it's manifesting with lung trouble over here. Or maybe, right, the fire, right? If their person's really impatient, or there's something with the heart where the heart is like too strong, right? It's, you know, manifesting some excess fire, that might be throwing things off with the lungs over here. So the point here is that if you know the creation and the control cycles, and you know some of these correlations, you can begin to see how things that, right, like if someone were to say, oh, this person's angry, and the anger is out of proportion to what they're encountering in their life, maybe there's a problem with the kidneys or with the metal element in the body. You might say, that just doesn't make any sense. But if you begin to know this framework, oh, anger connected to wood. The wood element is created by the water element in the kidneys. It's controlled by the metal element in the lungs. There are different emotions with each case. And in any given case, a person's symptoms in terms of emotions, or what we might refer to as their psychological state or the mental state, is thought to be connected to the energetics of the body and the organs of the body. And just to be clear, this is the tip of the iceberg, right? That each of these has a particular flavor associated with it, right? The spleen is associated with sweetness and the earth element. So, right, if a person's craving sweets all the time, that might be a sign that something's off balance with the earth element, right? Or, right, if you need to strengthen the earth element, you might prescribe, I mean, you theoretically could prescribe more sweet foods, right, to help strengthen that. So this begins to give you a sense of ways of seeing a person holistically, and seeing a person as being connected at some level with the cosmos and the directions and the seasons and basic elements of reality. There's much more to say about that. And there's certainly critical questions to raise about it, but I think that's good enough, at least good enough for government work for a first pass through an account of the Chinese 5 phases or 5-element metaphysics. Okay.